Let's move then into Taoism. In many respects, Taoism and Confucianism are kind of mirror images of each other, in that the things that Confucius advocated are the things that the Taoists reject, and instead offer the opposite. Now, there are some people that would date Taoism as very, very old, 2,000 years before Christ. Those were some tradition years there. But the main focus, the cohesiveness of Taoism, develops around the same time as Confucius. As I mentioned, of course, there are a variety of societies, there are a variety of thinkers and systems developing. And it also seems that as this developed, it develops primarily as a critique of Confucianism. For the Taoists, Confucianism was actually harmful to society. By the imposition of its rules and practices, it was interfering with human life. And so Taoism was thought to be this kind of attempt to balance society against strict Confucianism. In response to that, the Taoists claim that what is important is not ritual propriety, it's not in etiquette, but it is in being in harmony with the Tao. And if one is in harmony with the Tao, and we'll talk about what the Tao here is in a little bit, then harmony will exist in social relations. That's what will bring balance to society. Here too, of course, we have the distinctions between philosophical Taoism, with its metaphysical explanations of reality, and then religious Taoism, which refers to a variety of rituals that we'll talk about in a little bit. The first great expression of Taoism is a text known as the Tao Te Ching. The title translates something to like the classic of the way and its power. Tao most often is translated as way in English. So the classic of the way and its power, the classic of the Tao and its power. Traditionally, it has been ascribed to an individual named Lao Tzu, sometimes also called Lao Tzu. It's one of those difficulties of translating Chinese into English. According to legend, Lao Tzu was a native of southern China, active in the court of the Zhou dynasty. Confucius and Confucianism, on the other hand, was a northern Chinese system. So not only do you have this critique of Confucianism in the philosophy, there's also kind of this regional issue. There is a question, however, whether Lao Tzu actually existed. The name translates to something like old master or old sage, and so it might not be a personal name at all. It might simply be referring to the wisdom of the ages. The final version of the text seems to be from around the 4th century BC, but it appears to have been a revision or a collection of earlier and older teaching. More than half the passages of the Tao Te Ching rhyme in Chinese, suggesting that the goal of this was for memorization, transmission orally, and not as important as about the why. Its poetic nature, however, also makes it a very cryptic work. It's esoteric, it's hard to grasp, it's mystical. It uses riddles to express religious truths. Now, perhaps it was done this way so only initiates, right, people that were a part of the system would understand it. But it does make it very difficult for some people to, especially outsiders, to figure out what's going on here. For example, here are the opening stanzas of the Tao Te Ching. The way that can be spoken of is not the constant way. And remember, the word way there is the translation of the Tao. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the constant Tao. The name that can be named is not the constant name. The nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. The named was the mother of the myriad creatures. And always rid yourself of desires in order to observe its secrets, but always allow yourself to have desires in order to observe its manifestations. What does that mean? If you tried to explain that to somebody, how would you try to explain it? I mean, the way that can be spoken of is not the constant way. What do you think might be the point?
Maybe there isn't one way of doing things.
Okay.
On the other hand, there could be a certain way of doing things that are evolving in ways that are possible as well.
Okay.
Wasn't it in Hinduism that it was like the whole world was just one big sham, and like the whole point of like what they could figure out what that it's not true. Like you just what you know, like everything you know is wrong.
Yeah, there's certainly some aspect of that in Daoism. This kind of lack of understanding. I think there's also, in this first section here, the idea that's trying to be presented is that in talking about the Tao, to try and put it into words is impossible. And so if you put it into words, you are not truly talking about the Tao. And so the Tao that can be spoken of is not the constant Tao, is not the constant way. The name that can be named is not the constant name. However, when we come down to these two parts, we start to see that there are some things we can talk about. Right? The name was the mother of the myriad creatures. Right? So we have this physical existence that we can talk about. So we can talk about the manifestations of the Tao. Right? How we see the Tao in the world. But we can't fully grasp it by only focusing on the things that we see and can touch and experience. That's kind of where I think it's going. It's this idea about the ineffable aspect. You can't talk about it. Almost like the first rule of Taoism is you don't talk about Taoism. You can't. To put it into words is too difficult. You have to experience it. Which again, it kind of makes it difficult for us to even try and talk about Taoism, right? So we can't talk about it, so let's talk about it. The true Tao cannot be defined. The true way cannot be defined. The word Tao had been used by other systems, other philosophies. Confucius, when he wanted to talk about a way or a path, would use Tao. But within those systems, it was largely to talk about this kind of cosmic or natural law. And this, when we get into Taoism, some of that is there, but you can't really define it, as we've mentioned, right? You kind of have these expressionless, transcendent experiences of the Tao. The Tao itself was prior to the universe. It is an unchanging first principle. Remember, the nameless was responsible for the creation of the universe. It is also the source of creation. So it's prior to all things, but also responsible for all things. And it pervades reality throughout everything. It's kind of like the Force. Right? Really, I mean, it's hard to explain it in any other way. That seems to be something that we can kind of latch on to from a pop culture standpoint. Is this idea of this, it's not a personal deity. In other expressions of Chinese religion and the use of the Tao, there are some ways in which Tao is used to kind of suggest personal being. But by the time of Taoism, it's more of this impersonal force. Some people said that it's almost as if the God, lowercase g, of Taoism is energy. It's not a personal being. And so this idea of this energy that kind of permeates the universe. And so that's kind of why you have, like books like the Tao of Physics. Right? That there's ways as physics scholars kind of encountered some elements of Taoism. They saw some things reflected in Taoism that fit in nicely with models of physics that were being developed especially in the middle of the 20th century. Other people, of course, found a lot of similarities with the philosophy of Winnie the Pooh, which is why you saw the Tao of Pooh in the previous slide. This idea of this kind of Taoist view of life that Winnie the Pooh supposedly had. But not only is the Tao this impersonal force that's responsible for creation, the idea is that it is a way to behave, a model for behavior, a way to act. And so the Tao is out there in nature, experienced through nature, but it is also the inner Tao. And by getting in touch with the inner Tao, that helps you act properly. The Tao is also the source of the two great forces in Chinese conceptualizations of the universe, yin and yang. Represented by that circle divided in half with a kind of sinuous line, not a straight line, so half white, half black, with the two dots in each of them representing the opposite color. The two-dimensional static picture of this symbol doesn't fully encapsulate, surprise, surprise, the ideas of yin and yang, because it should be thought of as constantly in motion. So this white circle, like expanding to take over the black circle expanding to take over the white. Right? So it's constantly in motion, constantly fluid. But even in Taoism, especially as we're talking about here, a lot of the nature of the universe, the forces in the universe, are broken into yin forces and elements and yang forces and elements. And so things associated with yin are things that are dark, things connected with the earth, things connected with femaleness, autumn, valleys, the west, that lower soul, right, the one that goes into the grave. The yang forces are connected with things that are bright, heaven, maleness, spring, mountains, the east, and the soul that ascends to the heavens. Often, Taoism emphasizes the yin aspects of this. The Tao Te Ching refers to the Tao in feminine imagery, stresses feminine virtues. Some people will also kind of use yin and yang to compare Taoism to Confucianism, right? Taoism is concerned with yin type of things. Confucianism is concerned with yang types of things. Taoism is much more of a passive approach to life, right? More of a yin virtue. So, if the goal is to experience the Tao, and that's going to help you live the right kind of life, how do you go about experiencing the Tao? The way that you do this is through Wu Wei. Sometimes translated non-action, sometimes non-interference. It is not entirely an absence of any action as much as it is an absence of artificial action. And so detachment from activity, artificiality, avoiding unnatural action, Some people have put it as going with the flow. That's kind of the idea behind Wu Wei. And so you seek the path of non-action and non-interference. And probably the best way to experience that, or before we get to that, I forgot I had this. So here's another quote from the Daoism that kind of attempts to explain Wu Wei. Without leaving his door, he, that's the sage, knows everything under heaven. Without looking out of his window, he knows all the ways of heaven. For the further one travels, the less one knows. Therefore the sage arrives without going, sees all without looking, does nothing, yet achieves everything. And so this idea of that if you will live the path of Wu Wei, then all the things that you would think you'd want in life will come to you. The best way to kind of achieve this in Taoism is to escape into nature. You're able to experience the Tao more clearly when you're away from society and away from its artificiality. The rules and the practices, especially those of Confucianism, are things that take you further away from the Tao. They interfere with your natural inclinations. We can kind of compare it to some of the divisions that we see of even in Christianity. In their nature, what are human beings like? Are they good in nature or evil? You'll have some Christians that will say, in their nature, human beings are evil. There's nothing good in human nature. Others will say, no, in their nature, human beings are good, and we get our nature tarnished by sin. Similar kind of thing going on with Confucianism-Daoism. In Confucianism, our inner nature is more towards chaos and instability. And so we need the rules and practices of Confucianism to bring order. For Taoism, it's the exact opposite. By nature, we are good. We will act ethically. We will live rightly. But what happens is we get into society, and that moves us away from ourselves. And so in thinking about a political outlook, Taoism tended to be more libertarian in its view than Confucianism. And so Taoists said the state needs to interfere in people's lives very, very little. And that if the state creates all these rules, it's actually not going to achieve what it wants to achieve. And that with fewer rules, people will act more in harmony with the Tao.